Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Number 10, reports from the town manager. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. I've distributed copies of my report. I promise to be brief. Just hit a few highlights here. Under council business, the current year operating budget, and I know we've been talking about this the last number of months. On September 16th, the General Assembly did adopt the state budget for the current year. Under that budget, state aid to West Hartford would total approximately $21 million. However, I think as we all know, the governor has expressed several concerns about the package and will very likely issue a veto. So in the event that that happens and that the governor is running the state under executive order, if that occurs, management will set aside funds in every department, every municipal department on the town side, to be used as an offset for a possible loss in state aid. And the set-aside funds, they would include projected payroll savings associated with vacant positions, whether they're full-time or part-time, as well as some overtime. And as positions, if they become vacant over the course of the year, you know, we would move them into this category unless we determine that they're mission critical. And then we'd also have a target transfer of 10% for non-payroll accounts. And these set-aside funds, we've informed our directors, would remain unavailable until there's more clarity on the budget. Next item, council subcommittees. A couple will be meeting between tonight and your next meeting on the 10th. Public Safety will meet at 8 a.m. on October 5th. And Finance and Budget will meet at 6:15 p.m. on October 10th, in advance of the council meeting that night. Just one item I wanted to mention, two items I want to mention under departmental reports. Columbus Day, town hall, municipal offices, libraries, public schools will be closed on Monday, October 9th in observance of the Columbus Day holiday. However, there's no delay in the collection of trash and recyclables, and the recycling center will be open that day from 7 to 4:30 p.m. Another item that I wanted to highlight on page 2, the town, we've begun our last round of paving and street milling, and we've got a number of streets included in this round, and those consist of Middlebrook Road, Northmore, Carlisle, Russell Lane, Old Meadow, Walker Lane, Flag Road, and Gifford Road. School buses and local traffic will be allowed to utilize the roads during this period. The last couple of pages are for you, Mayor. When you get to your report, the last thing I would add is that I continue to meet with any number of folks as part of my orientation. Recently had a great tour with the Housing Authority, was able to view their properties and was quite impressed. Was able to make a presentation at the Senior Center, which I enjoyed quite a bit. And Mr. Privatera and I continue to monitor things happening at the MDC. We recently attended their budget workshop, and they'll be presenting their proposed budget later on this fall. The MDC is somewhat unique in that their fiscal year is a calendar year. It's different from our year. So that concludes my report, Mayor. Happy to take any questions council members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. Mr. Hart, going back to the first item on the state budget, and your report says that the state aid to West Hartford under the adopted budget would be approximately $21 million. Do you know what the town would receive under the governor's executive order that would be in place if we don't have a budget?
Well, it depends on whether or not the executive order holds or is modified. I think I do have that with me. The executive order number 2, as we reported, would have had a very significant impact on West Hartford. So state aid under the governor's executive order, and Mr. Privatera, feel free to add any clarification that you think would be needed, is about $1.7 million. 1.7.
Okay. So between 21 million down to 1.7.
Under the governor's second executive order, yes. Okay. Now, the governor, subsequent to his second executive order, had presented a proposed compromise budget, which brought state aid to West Hartford to about $17.9 million.
Okay, thank you. And in the news, we read about the upcoming deadline, or the significance of the October 1 deadline, which is the first installment of state statutory aid funding to towns and cities, correct?
Yes.
And so what impact will there be, I guess if any, to West Hartford after October 1st?
Well, the grants, and I'll ask Mr. Privatera to come forward. ECS grant is actually a little bit later in October. Again, we're trying to be prepared for contingencies if indeed state revenue comes in considerably less than what we had included in the adopted budget for this year, which is why we're recommending, or why we would pursue this set aside. Another issue I should highlight are the motor vehicle taxes. Mr. Privatera and I feel as though the town should make a decision around October 1st so that we could get bills out by the end of October. And I believe from a cash flow perspective, we would be in decent shape through the calendar year, but that is approaching quickly. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you can add to my comment.
Sure. To your first comment, in the governor's second executive order, he eliminated all of our ECS funding. So our first ECS payment is due, I think it's October 17th. So normally we would receive a little over $5 million. If his executive order were to stay in place, we wouldn't receive that money. But we did prepare a cash flow analysis, and we feel that we would have enough cash on hand to run us close to the end of the calendar year, and that is exclusive of any state aid. So we made an assumption that we were not going to receive that money. My conversation with the town manager was that when we bill for that motor vehicle at 32 mills, our expectation is we would receive between $12 and $14 million of revenue. And if there's no resolution to the state budget at hand, we could certainly use that extra $12 to $14 million of cash. So my recommendation to him was we should start thinking about billing a little sooner, but we could wait a little longer and see what happens with this October deadline, October 1st deadline. We do have a little time, but you know, every time it seems that we've been waiting, that decision has been pushed off for another 2 to 3 weeks. So.
Okay. And if you could briefly just explain the car tax consideration,
sure.
why we're
sure.
thinking about that and waiting.
The existing legislation basically required us to set a mill rate for 32 mills for car taxes, with the expectation that we would receive an offsetting grant of about $2.5 million. When the governor's executive order came out, the second one, that $2.5 million was reduced to about $177,000. So there was questionable concern raised that, number one, are we going to be able to increase that mill rate to 37 mills in the same manner we did in the prior year? If you recall, the same thing happened. Or would there be legislation introduced that would allow us to go back to a uniform mill rate, in which case we'd have to reset our own mill rate? A lot of questions are out there. One of the reasons why we decided to hold off on sending that bill out was because there's a price tag associated with it. It would cost us about $22,000 to $26,000 to do everything and mail it out. So our expectation was that if we waited a little longer for some resolution, we wouldn't have to incur that cost. So that's what's going on with the motor vehicle mill rate. And there's still, although there's been some indication that that 32 mills is not going to stand, I have not seen any legislation that would allow us to change it. So we're still waiting on that item.
Very good, thank you. One last question. One of the things included in the governor's executive order was shifting a percentage of the teacher's pension fund to the community. It was unclear whether it was going to be a third or something less than that. And my question is whether the town has considered that and prepared for that contingency of that liability in whatever amount being shifted to the community.
I believe that was under his compromise budget, and I believe that cost was equivalent to the normal cost that he was apportioning out. So that $1.8 million. Again, when the budget was passed, there was no indication that that was in it. It's not in it. I guess we're going to have to wait and see what the final numbers look like, whether or not that's in. You know, there's been talk about the pilots being eliminated and replaced with something else. I mean, there's all different variations of what could come out of this. But at this point in time, we're just trying to react to what we know. And the last budget that was approved, it's not in there. So we're just going to have to wait and see what the final outcome is.
Okay. So under the budget that passed, West Hartford would receive $21 million, and also there'd be no shift in the teacher pension obligation to the town?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privateer. Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Spending time with the MDC, yay, lucky you. Industrial rates. It was about a year ago when MDC enticed Niagara with huge discounts, both in terms of water and sewer. That's off the backs of those of us that pay for that discount. And it was going to be revisited this year. We were fortunate because there was such public outcry and because we experienced a drought that they rescinded that huge discount. So now, a year later, I'm sure they're revisiting and thinking everyone's probably distracted with the budget or whatever. They're going to slip through a huge discount for Niagara for water. So are you guys talking about industrial rates? And if so, what's happening?
Yeah, I believe that that subject came up during the budget conversation. They didn't have a concrete recommendation that was ready to be presented to the public. I don't know if there's any additional detail you'd want to provide on that, Peter.
Basically, they presented a preliminary budget, and you know, they identified the budget drivers, which were, you know, primarily debt service and benefit costs going up. And we were made aware of a potential increase in our ad valorem on a year-over-year basis, which is significant, as it is in prior years. So we're going to be working. We have another meeting in October, and we're going to go back. You know, we're going to look at their budget, and obviously we're going to ask a lot of questions. And our expectation is that we're going to do everything we can to get that ad valorem increase reduced. There was just some cursory discussion on rates, but I think we were all concentrating on why did your number go up so much? Why did your budget increase so much? And we were trying to, you know, look at ways to get that down.
Thank you, Mr. Privateer.
Thank you. Can I just make one comment? I'm sorry. So thank you for that. Can we be updated as they talk about industrial rates so that this doesn't slide, you know, it's off the radar, no one's thinking about it. It's going to be done, it's going to be bad. So I'd like to avoid that from happening, and that is if we have more information in terms of where are they at in terms of industrial rates so that we can get involved.
No, we can certainly do that, and MDC has some number of meetings planned for the CEOs of the member towns. I'm not sure if they did that in the past. I believe they've added some recently, and that really gives us an opportunity to critique the budget, push back on certain things, recommend certain things. So we will keep the council informed moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just real quick to follow up, what kind of ad valorem increases are they contemplating?
Right now, I think the latest, and again, they're still working on it, the latest for the overall ad valorem was 8%.
Okay.
But again, this was a preliminary meeting. Initially, they came in a little higher. They came back a second time. They went out to, I think they rebid on their electricity rates, and they got a more favorable rate, so that they were able to reduce that. And we received an updated report from them on their budget. And again, as the town manager said, when we meet again, we're still going to ask a lot of questions on the impact of, why did these specific categories go up so much?
And you said 8%?
I believe 8% was the ad valorem, was as it stands right now.
Mr. Hart?
And that 8% also includes certain assumptions on a contingency account. So there are opportunities to bring it down further, and we will push hard for that.
Okay. All right, Bill, you have other questions? Go ahead if it's on this subject. Go ahead.
No, just a contingency fund, assumptions about that. I was just wondering if you could.
No, just
respond.
MDC contingency in their budget, and any public sector organization has a contingency account. I think the question is whether or not it's more than it should be.
Thank you. And I was frustrated because the meeting was set on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, which was insensitive, and I did say, don't ever do that again. But anyway, Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Coming back to the teacher's pension fund and the shifting of costs involved in that, there was no shift in the budget that passed the General Assembly to the town, but I believe there was a shift in cost to our town teachers. Can you speak to what the increase contribution for teachers would be under the budget that passed and how that would work?
I cannot. I don't know if you know that detail.
I think
Mr.
their contribution would go up from 5 to 7%. That number sticks in my mind, but is it 6 to 8? I know it was 2%. Oh, 6 to 8. Okay, I know it was up 2%.
Okay, and that contribution, that would go to the, I'm sorry, it's not a question, it's appropriate for you, Pete, because I know you didn't write it. Sorry.
Okay, Mr. Dodge. Anybody else? Mr. Davidoff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would it be possible for you to forward us some of these documents that are coming from the MDC so that we could examine them early on?
Yeah, I think we just need to verify that they're public documents. But we'd be happy to do that.
All right, well,